In this video, we're going to start by talking about the different types of price discrimination. So there are three types, or what we call degrees of price discrimination. The first degree, is when you charge each customer their maximum willingness to pay. First degree price discrimination, which is also known as perfect price discrimination, is very rare. Right? It's very difficult to actually be able to determine someone's maximum willingness to pay and actually charge them that price. Right? It requires a lot of information and a lot of information that most people aren't willing to give. Right? If I'm buying a good, I'm not going to tell the person I'm buying the good from how much I'm willing to pay them. Right? You can kind of think of this as this is not perfect price discrimination, but similar to if you're haggling over something. Right? If you go to a bazaar or you go to a flea market or something like yard sale, and you try to haggle with the person selling the good, right? You're not going to come out and say, I'm willing to pay up to $20 for this. No, you're going to tell them another price that's lower than your maximum, right? You're not going to give up that information. So it's very difficult to do perfect price discrimination. One of the few places that actually are the few kind of categories where you even get close to seeing perfect price discrimination is college tuition. Right? When you're applying to school, if you're trying to get any financial aid, you have to fill out a FAFSA, you have to fill out a bunch of other forms with a bunch of information, right, about your family income, all these other different things. That information allows a school to know, or at least to get a pretty good idea what your maximum willingness to pay, right? And not everyone pays the same, right? Financial aid and other things are going to make the cost of tuition different for different people, right? If you come from a very wealthy family, you're more likely to have to pay the full amount, the full kind of sticker price for college tuition. But if you come from a lower income family, right, you're more likely to pay a lower amount. Right? But again, this type of price discrimination is very rare because it's very difficult, right? But an example of perfect price discrimination, or really as close as we get, is that college tuition. Second degree price discrimination is when you charge different amounts based on quantity, how much you're buying. Right, so really this is where we're talking about kind of bulk goods, all right? So this one, this type, the second degree price discrimination is more common than first degree, certainly. So you can see this in a lot of different places, right? So if you go to Walmart and you buy, I don't know, what's a good example? I don't know. You buy a 12 pack of Cokes or something, right? the per unit cost is going to be higher than if you went to Sam's Club, owned by the same company, and bought a pallet of Cokes, right? Your per unit cost is going to go down, right, because you're buying it in bulk, right? And we can see kind of these discounts for buying more, right, because you're kind of guaranteeing like, hey, you don't have to hold this in inventory, you don't have to transport it to different places, right? I'm going to just buy it all at once, right? And so you can get a discount because that allows the company to kind of spread those fixed costs over more a larger quantity, right? You're kind of helping them out, helping to lower their costs, and so you can get a lower price. All right, so things like those really big store like Sam's Club, Costco, we're going to see those, right? A lot of other products as well. The more you buy, the cheaper it is, kind of on a per unit basis. I remember my mother's a school teacher, so she always had those Oriental Trading Company magazines. I don't know if anybody is familiar with those, but they would have prices broken down, and they would get lower and lower as you went from, a dozen to a gross to, which is 12 dozen, right? And as you increase the quantity, the price is lowered. That is an example of second-degree price discrimination. Third-degree price discrimination is definitely the most common type of price discrimination. This is where you charge different prices to different consumer groups. So these different consumer groups could kind of be different markets geographically. So the example of Combivir, where in Europe it was sold for $12.50 per pill, and in Africa it was sold for 50 cents per pill. That is an example of third-degree price discrimination. You're charging different consumer groups different prices, but it doesn't have to be geographical differences that define these consumer groups. Right, one big example, and we're going to have a couple of these just because they are very common, right? So senior discounts, right? Most in a lot of places, a lot of things, restaurants, movie theaters, all kinds of establishments, right? If you're over the age of I guess, is it 55? I guess that's when you get your AARP card or whatever, right? Whatever that is, right? You can get a senior discount, right? That is a lower price for a specific consumer group, senior citizens, people over, well, not really senior citizens, people over 55. That's not really a senior citizen, I don't think, but you can still get that discount, right? Probably the idea behind this is, for some things, maybe the demand for those products or those services are more elastic for people over the age of 55, right? So to entice them to take advantage of that, they are going to offer that discount, right? In your textbook, they kind of give movies, right? Theaters as an example where you see a senior discount, right? Kind of the idea there is, maybe older people are less likely to go see the movie. I know that if my dad is an example of people over the age of 55, his demand for movies is very elastic, partially just because he falls asleep every time he watches a movie, so he doesn't really get a lot out of it. So if he's having to pay the full price, very unlikely to go. If it's a lower price with the senior discount, right, then more likely to go. Although for him, still not very likely. Right, we can also say this in similar things like student discounts. We also see those at movie theaters. That's going to probably mostly be portion of the budget, kind of the idea that makes their demand more elastic, right? Students usually don't have a whole lot of money, so if they're having to pay the full price for a movie ticket, they're not as likely to go as someone who has graduated and has a job and is earning income, right? We also see this, especially the student discount. I'm sure you guys are all well aware of the opportunities for student discounts, right? You can get student discounts on anything from, as we mentioned, movie tickets to most kind of publications like the Wall Street Journal, presumably the New York Times, right? All of these different things that'll offer a reduced student rate. And as well as things like some types of software, right? Your book kind of gives the example of a statistical software package called Stata, which is just something used to, if you've taken stats, run some statistical analysis, regression models, ANOVA, so on and so forth, right? To actually buy it for kind of the professional edition or the real edition, or I guess it's the same edition, but if you're buying it just as a normal person, right, it's $1,000 plus, all right, but as a student you can get it for like $125. That might not be actually accurate, but it says it in the book. I think it's about $125, right? Again, because student cannot afford, over $1,000 for, or most students, I should say, probably almost all, cannot afford to pay $1,000+ for some kind of software package, and so in order to get that, get those individuals, they're going to have to lower that price. All right, so now that we've talked about some of the different types of price discrimination, have talked about some of the examples, let's talk about a question that you might be asked: is price discrimination bad, right? For some, you might say, well, it kind of depends on which side of the coin you're on, and that is true. But there is kind of a definitive answer. Right, it does depend on some factors. All right, so went a little blurry there. All right, now we're back. Is price discrimination bad? So the general rule is that when output falls or stays the same with price discrimination, it's bad. Right, so if price discrimination doesn't allow the firm to increase their production, right, or if they just don't increase their production, right, that's when price discrimination is not going to be good, right? That's usually going to result in a overall kind of a total loss of surplus, so a decrease in total surplus, right? However, if quantity increases, that usually corresponds with a increase in total surplus. to further investigate this question of whether or not price discrimination is bad, let's look at Combivir once again. So we're going to look at Combivir where there is price discrimination, and we're going to imagine that there is no price discrimination. There's a single price set for everyone. All right. So there are kind of two ways that this can go. All right. In the first case, the company that makes Combivir, GSK, sets a price that's somewhere between the price charged to Europeans and the price charged to Africans. Let's say that that's that world price. All right, so it's a meeting somewhere in the middle. All right, so in this case, Europeans are going to pay less than they would with price discrimination, and Africans are going to pay more, right? Kind of ideas about fairness aside, if we're looking at kind of the benefit, we would really be looking at total surplus, right? And so the change in total surplus is going to depend on how much does it benefit Europeans versus how much does it hurt Africans, right? So we could see either a negative or a positive change to total surplus, right? But that overall effect would be determined by kind of how much better off Europeans are made versus how much worse off Africans are made. All right, so that's kind of the first option. That's kind of indeterminate. We're not sure. It would depend on several factors, right? But here's the question. How likely is it that GlaxoSmithKline is actually going to set the price at the world price, right? All right, so here's the thing I referenced in the first video. All right, 2/3 of the 630 million people living in Africa live on less than $1 a day. All right, so the company cannot increase their profits by selling a lot of this drug at kind of this price, right? Especially if you're increasing the price for Africans. They probably really already, most of them can't afford that 50 cents per day. So if you increase the price, probably even a very small amount, that's going to cut how many you can. So they can't just sell a bunch of it, right? They can't increase quantity to a large extent in order to make up the profit they're losing from practicing price discrimination, right? So what's probably more likely than if this company GSK is going to set a single price, it's probably more likely that instead of setting a price between the European price and the African price, they're simply going to set the price at the European level and then just abandon the African market altogether. All right, so this is kind of the option 2, right? So in this scenario, right, Europeans are no better off than they were, right? They aren't seeing their surplus increase. They're still paying the same price for combo beer as they were with price discrimination. And Africans are definitely worse off because they no longer have access to the drug, or at the very least, only the very wealthy would have access to the drug. All right, and so in a case like this, right, it's much more beneficial to have price discrimination so that total surplus increases, right? If we don't have price discrimination in a case like this, it's very unlikely that total surplus would be as high with price discrimination. So with price discrimination, we would see higher total surplus than without it. All right. Kind of continuing on this idea of is price discrimination bad, we're going to talk a little bit about, well actually I'm going to write something down, then I'm going to pose a question. Well, that's completely dead. So one of the benefits of price discrimination is that it can help cover fixed costs. The book poses a great question in that it asks, would you rather have a disease that is very common or a disease that is rare? Right? And although this might seem like a silly question, right, there is a definitive answer. Right? If you have a common disease, you're much more likely to have treatment available, right? So the idea here is that the cost of developing a treatment for a common disease versus a rare disease, let's just for argument's sake say that they are equally costly, right? That the cost of developing these drugs, right, is the same whether we're talking about a rare disease or a common disease, right? I think that's a little generous because probably more expensive to find a treatment for a rare disease, I would imagine, but I also don't know, so we're just going to assume they're the same, all right? If those costs are the same, right, and we do not, well, let's just say this. So if the costs are the same, right, the incentive is for companies to find treatments for common diseases, right? The more common the disease, the larger market there is, the more profitable that market could be, right? Because there are more people that are going to demand your product. So it's much more likely that those drugs are going to get developed, and the opposite is true for our rare diseases, right? There are very few people, right, or fewer people that have this disease, right? There's a smaller market, so you're not going to make as much of a profit, right? So, right, those high fixed costs of researching and developing this new drug, right, compared with the the potential profit from, or the potential revenue from selling it, right? It's going to make it more likely that you're going to sell or to create the treatment for this common drug, right? What price discrimination allows is for a company to develop, say, this treatment for a rare disease, then sell that treatment to people who are willing to pay more for it, right, at a higher price, and then once they've gotten their they get to their break-even point or they start making profit, well, now the idea is that it doesn't cost them really much more to produce more units of that drug, right? If they're able to cover their costs by charging a higher price in one market, then it makes it more likely that they would sell the drug for less in a different market, right? Because they've already covered those fixed costs, so now they can spread them out, or if they haven't, they are covering them, and then they can spread out some of the more of the fixed costs by selling more of the product at a lower cost. So they essentially increase their potential market, right? Because if it costs a whole lot to develop this drug, right? If you can spread it out, we'll rebound a second. All right, so it costs a whole lot to develop this drug. If it's a common disease, all right, or a treatment, whatever, if it's a common disease, then you can spread those fixed costs out among more people. You can charge a lower price. But if it's rare, then you have to charge a higher price to cover those fixed costs, right? Allowing price discrimination allows there to be a larger market, right? So if you don't have price discrimination, it's only these people that can afford the drug that are going to get it. If you allow price discrimination, once they've been taken care of, then the lower cost can be given to a larger group of people, right? It's going to bring in more revenue, right? And that's going to make it more likely for innovation, right? So someone's more likely to innovate if they're able to spread those fixed costs over a larger quantity, right? A larger quantity being produced. All right, this isn't just the case for drugs and pharmaceuticals. The book gives the example of Kevlar. Right? We're probably all familiar with Kevlar. It's used in bulletproof vests. It's also used in tires, right? To help keep those, I guess, together and from puncturing or whatever. Regardless, it's used in tires. Right? The Kevlar used for bulletproof vests is definitely more expensive, right? It's going to have a higher price than the market for Kevlar when we're putting it in tires. Right? If the company that produces Kevlar is unable to, or was unable to price discriminate and charge different prices to these different markets, right? There's less of an incentive that they would have developed this at all, right? Or at least that it would be as widespread, right? At least it doesn't. I'm not saying that it would mean that they wouldn't develop it, but it would be less likely, right? There'd be less of an incentive to innovate, right? Because if you can only sell it at one price, right? Then you might only sell it at the Kevlar, not the Kevlar price, that's what we're talking about. The bulletproof vest price, right? And that's going to be a much smaller market that's going to be less of a profit than if you can sell it to the bulletproof vest market at one price, and then also for a lower price, but for a much larger market, sell it to the companies that make tires, right? So price discrimination can increase the incentive to innovate, right? And without it, there could be some cases where we would not see that innovation. All right, the last thing we're going to talk about is kind of two topics, which are tying and bundling. All right, so these are some other methods for price discrimination. Tying The simple definition of tying is that in order to use one good, you have to use another good, right? And specifically another good that's made by the same firm, right? So in order to use this one good, I have to buy this other good from the same company. Right? A classic example of this is printers and ink. Right? A lot of the time when you are looking at printers, especially these days, printers are extremely cheap. You can buy cheap printers for next to nothing. Right? However, ink can remain extremely expensive. Right? And most of the time, if you buy, say, an HP printer, you have to buy HP ink, right? You have to buy the ink from the same company, right? And so this is our bundling, right? The idea here, and then why this is kind of tied to price discrimination, is kind of the different consumer groups here are people that want to, print a lot of stuff versus people that don't want to print a lot of stuff, right? If you don't really care that much, right, you don't necessarily care about printing stuff all the time, maybe you just want something occasionally, right? You're not going to be willing to pay a lot of money for a printer, right? But, all right, if you do print a lot, right, then you're going to continue to buy ink, right? If you're not printing a lot, then you might, say, oh, this printer's cheap. Maybe you don't even use all of the ink that comes with the printer, right? And so you're fine with that, right? And so you're still capturing those people that don't necessarily need a printer or want a printer that much. You're getting revenue from them, or the company is, but you're also getting revenue from the people that do want to print a lot. They see the printer, they buy it, and then they continually buy ink, right? Because they have to buy that brand of ink to use in the printer, right? And so you're able to take advantage of both consumer groups, right? And to profit off of both of them. All right, time was pretty quick. Now let's talk about bundling. Alright, so bundling is when you're requiring products to be bought in a bundle or package, right? So things are getting put together and you have to buy the whole thing if you're going to buy any of it. Now, the example we're going to do is Microsoft Office. Right. I'll go ahead and say at the start of this, kind of in the textbook, it talks about how you can buy. Well, first, Microsoft Office, right? That's Word, Excel, OneNote, Access, PowerPoint, all that stuff, right? The book mentions that you can still buy these products individually, and I haven't double checked that. But I seem to recall the last couple times I've tried to get Word or something, you have to buy all of it at once, or you have to do the Windows, the Office 365, kind of their online version. Regardless, a lot of times you just buy Microsoft Office. You don't buy them individually. So let's talk about why this is. So we're going to simplify things and just look at kind of Excel and Word. All right, so, and we're gonna say we've got two consumers, right? We've got Wanda and Cosmo. All right, so Wanda is willing to pay $100 for Word, and she's willing to pay $20 for Excel. Cosmo is willing to pay $40 for Word and $90 for Excel. right? So if Microsoft is going to sell these products individually, right? So sell just Excel, just Word, right? And these are the only two in the market, right? Let's look at the price they should charge. All right, so looking at Word real quick, right? So if we've got this simple case, right, you're going to charge either $100 or $40. If you're Microsoft, there's not much point in charging somewhere in between, right? Because if you charge in between, let's say $60, then Wanda is going to buy it for less than she would have, and Cosmo's still not going to buy it because he's only going to pay $40, right? So if Microsoft charges $100, right, only Wanda is going to buy Word, right? And so their profit will be $100. If they charge $40, then both Wanda and Cosmo are going to buy Word, and their profit is going to be $80. So very likely 100 is more than 80, so they're going to charge $100. So we'll keep that tucked away in our back pocket. All right, now let's look at Excel. All right, Excel, all right, again, kind of the same thing. They're either going to charge $20, which is what Wanda values it at, or $90, which is what Cosmo values it at. So at $20, right, and we're also, I guess I should have mentioned this since we're saying private, we're going to assume that the marginal cost, or the average cost of producing one more unit of this software is $0, so whatever the price is pure profit for this example, just to clarify that, all right? So at $20, both Wanda and Cosmo are going to buy Excel, so the profit is going to be $40. At $90, only Cosmo is going to buy Excel, so Microsoft's profit is going to be $90. So if, so the profit is $40 at a price of 20, $90 at a price of 90, 90's higher than 40, so they're going to charge $90. So their total profit would be $190, right? $100 from selling Word to Wanda and $90 from selling Excel to Cosmo. So again, we're going to keep that in mind. And now we're going to add another row to this. Right, which is Office, right? So Office being Word and Excel together. All right, so if Wanda is gonna get Word and Excel, then she'd be willing to pay $120 for both of them together, bundled together, right? 100 for Word, 20 for Excel. Cosmo would be willing to pay $130, right? 40 for Word, 90 for Excel. So at a price of $120 for Office for the bundle, profit is $240. At a price of $130, the profit would be $130. All right, so once again, kind of following the same intuition, 240 is higher than 130. So Microsoft is going to sell, right, Office at $120. All right, so this is where I actually get to my point. Right, so sold individually, right, the profit is only going to be $190 because each customer is only going to buy the thing that's priced where they're willing to pay for it, right? They might just buy Word, or they might just buy Excel, right? But if you bundle them, right, then, well, let me backtrack a little bit. All right, individually they're only going to buy, right? They might only buy Word and they might only buy Excel, right? They probably still value Excel, just not as much as kind of what it's priced at, right? They're not willing to pay the price it's being offered at in order to get it, right? And so they're just going to leave it out altogether, right? But if you bundle it, then you're kind of spreading the costs, right? You're spreading the benefit across the different products, right? And so you put them together, someone to say, well, I'm willing to pay this much for Word, and if I pay a little bit extra, I can get Excel as well, right? And that little bit extra is worth it to me, right? I value Excel that much, or vice versa, right? So Wanda would probably be, I'm willing to pay $100 for Word, and yeah, I'll go ahead and pay an extra $20 to get Excel as well. Right? Cosmo, on the other hand, would say, I'm willing to pay $90 for Excel, and I'm willing to pay up to $40 for Word, although I only have to pay $30, right? Because his price would still be $120, right? So when you're bundling, what you're doing is you are essentially getting people to buy things that they maybe wouldn't normally buy, right? At the price that it usually is, right? By putting things together, right? So that they become more attractive or more beneficial to the consumer. All right, we see this as well, not just in things like Microsoft Office, but also in cable, right? For many consumers, there are a lot of channels that they don't use and they would rather not have to pay for, right? But those channels kind of are included because if only the people that wanted to watch them paid for them, they probably wouldn't exist, right? And there are consumers that do want those channels, right? You might not watch Lifetime, but somebody else does, right? And that person might not watch, the History Channel, but you might. So those differences, right? What they're doing is trying to kind of spread those out, right? So that the bundle looks attractive to a variety of customers, even if those customers don't have the same preferences. All right, so that is the end of price discrimination, and I will see you in the next chapter.